Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfix. This will be the reading of a one-shot entitled, I Wish I Could Believe You'd Never Wrong Me. Here's the summary. 1A gets hit with a worst memory quirk. Izuku fears it's going to show them all a memory of Kacchan. It doesn't. Izuku supposes he shouldn't even be surprised that they were attacked by villains when they were out. It was something of a tradition at this point, with Class 1A, now 2A, after the hellish events of their first year, which was the main reason the teachers didn't take any chances. The mandatory school supply run to the mall was populated by the entire class, with no chance of being outnumbered, and two of their teachers beside them. Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei were simultaneously silent and rambunctious presence at the back of the group, and no one, under any circumstances, was allowed to leave the group, which was ultimately their undoing, in a sense. If they had been split apart, or at least spread out, then maybe a handful of them would have been able to fight or dodge the attack from the group of low-rank villains that had decided to take their shot on Class A in broad daylight. As it was, the glowing blue ball of energy enveloped the entire group of them in seconds, and then they were standing in blank whiteness, the screaming chaos of the mall nowhere to be found. There was barely time for frightened whispers to break out before Aizawa-sensei was calling them to order. Is everyone here, uninjured? Mike assisted him with a head count, and he was relieved to find that no one was hurt in the slightest, just confused and a bit shaken by the abrupt change in surroundings. Kacchan let out an uneasy growl next to him. They had been walking next to each other when the attack hit, with Izuku chattering to him about a recent Hawks fight and Kacchan pretending not to listen but brushing their pinkies together often enough to show that he was listening and keep a light flush on Izuku's cheeks. Damn it, this was not the time, brain. Where are we? Ochako whispered from his other side, and he had followed the others in looking around. The ground was solid underneath them, but it was colored the same stark white as everything else, making it impossible to tell how big the space was or how high the ceiling, if there was one, had reached. None of their group had encountered a wall, and Aizawa-sensei sent out a few coils of his capture weapon without them running into anything, so there was no way to tell. Stay together, listeners, and try not to venture out. Teleportation quirk, hallucination, inducement, maybe a collective unconscious. A soft pinch to his side had roused him from his mutterings, and he didn't protest when Kacchan had grabbed his wrist and dragged him over to where their respective friend groups had intermixed, while the teachers investigated as best as they could. A few of them looked worried, but they were all on guard, and he could sense the gathering of quirks just beneath the surface of everyone's skin as they readied for anything the villain prepared to throw at them. It should be worth noting that none of them were surprised at this turn of events, which was a bit depressing to think about, so Izuku did his best to turn back to theorizing about the quirk that they were caught in. He didn't have long, though, as mere seconds passed by before he seemingly went blind. The image of Kacchan and their friends disappeared and left nothing but blackness in his vision, but he could hear the startled gasps and screams surrounding him that let him know that they were all still there, even if he couldn't see them. His vision returned, and he realized with a snort that they were suddenly somewhere completely different. It looked to be a traditional Japanese house, and they were standing near a kotatsu that was strewn with papers, but otherwise unoccupied. At the moment, he could hear the sounds of people walking around the rooms, the slight hum of an air conditioning, and the soft echoes of conversation. Someone let out a confused noise from his left. This is my house? The group as one turned to look at Ojiro, who was glancing around in confusion and slight fear. Izuku mirrored it. What reason could the villain have to send them to Ojiro's house? Were they really letting them go that easily? Their attention was stolen again by a loud knock at the front door, and a woman with long blonde hair and a kind face came from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She walked right past the group of them, as if they weren't even there, and answered the door cheerfully. There were 2 police officers waiting on the other side. Mom? It was a confused whisper, but none of the 3 people at the door seemed to hear the hero student. Are you Ojiro Masamu's mother? Ojiro choked on his spit, and Izuku turned to see his eyes go wide and his face blanch. No. He seemed to be in disbelief, and was the only one who didn't turn in time to see a small boy run out from the kitchen with a very familiar tail swinging behind him. There was no doubt it was Ojiro, except this Ojiro looked to be about 10 years younger. This is a memory, he realized suddenly. The police officers continued talking, ignoring the boy behind his mother as surely they ignored the group of them, though Izuku was beginning to think that they couldn't see them at all, with this being a memory. But of what? All quirks have specific parameters, so why this memory? Why did the villain want us to see this? There was a villain attack near your son's school, Ojiro-san. It caused massive property damage. He turned to look at his classmate, noticing how his eyes started to seem far away. Your son was caught in the blast. He was dead before paramedics could arrive on the scene. We're very sorry for your loss. Ojiro's mom let out a sob at the same moment her son, 16, had squeezed his eyes shut. Sato laid a heavy hand on his shoulder. Mama, young Ojiro had spoke up, tugging at his mother's skirts. Where's Nisan? They heard one more sob from the woman before their surroundings had darkened again, and they were back in the blank room. Ojiro still had tears in his eyes, but now he was starting to look angry. What the hell was that? Aizawa-sensei walked up to him, putting a hand on his free shoulder. His voice was blunt, but not unkind. Seems like you should be telling us that, kid. That... He swiped at the tears still gathered in his eyes. That was the day I found out my brother died in a villain attack. Kacchan had sucked in a harsh breath next to him, and Izuku couldn't help the way that he wanted to copy it. He can't imagine how horrible that must have been for Ojiro to relive. It was hard enough to watch. Why did we see that? Is the quirk showing memories? Kaminari's voice was hesitant, still glancing around the empty room from where he was tucked into Shinso's side. Not just memories. Izuku spoke up, giving voice to suspicion in his gut, despite how he wished it wasn't true. It seemed to be the only explanation, what with the way the particular villain had sought them out, flinging their quirk at a group of them, like they planned to do it from the beginning. The way that, for a second before they were sucked away, Izuku remembered seeing a gun strapped to their side, one they could have easily just shot at them with if they wanted to take them down. Then also remembered the wide, satisfied smile on their face when the hit landed. He thought that maybe they wanted something more than just to take them down. They wanted to hurt them. Our worst memories. And damn, sometimes Izuku really wished his quirk theories were wrong. Almost right after the sentence left his mouth, they were sucked into another memory, and Izuku was forced to watch his classmates relive the worst memories of their lives. Ashido finding out about her father's affair, Kaminari's quirk manifesting during a thunderstorm and almost killing his mother, Ochako's mother having a breakdown about them not being able to pay for the tuition for UA, even though her daughter had managed to get a scholarship. Kacchan, the sludge villain. He thought it was awful from the 30 seconds that he witnessed in real life, right before he ran in to try to save him. The quirk didn't focus on that part, though. The quirk focused on the moment the sludge had rose from the sewers, when its shadow fell over Kacchan and his lackeys, and they screamed. It focused on Kacchan's terrified face, when his palms were covered, explosions rendered useless. It focused on the 10 whole minutes of struggling for air before help had arrived, and the 4 minutes when heroes stood by and did nothing to save him. The memory cut off right before Izuku had run in, and Kacchan was practically trembling next to him. The quirk offered them no mercy to digest, and he barely had time to reach out and grip Kacchan's hand before it swept them away again. It was then that Izuku had a terrifying thought. If the quirk was going to show them their worst memories, then what would it show for him? He knew what the answer probably would be, and if the way Kacchan's hand was slowly tightening around Izuku's own, he knew it too. He prayed that wasn't the case. Kacchan wasn't like that anymore. He wasn't that person anymore. He had made so much progress since coming to UA. Look at them now, holding each other so tightly to get through a traumatic experience. He thought back to the way that they were brushing pinkies earlier, the way they had set sparring days every week, how they stayed up all night watching all my documentaries on Izuku's birthday because Kacchan remembered that used to be his favorite thing to do as a kid. They were doing better now. So much better. And he didn't think that he could stand it if the quirk threw that memory back in their faces. He knew he could deal with it, and had made his peace with it in the past 2 years, but it would destroy Kacchan. After all the progress he'd made, all the grueling hours in therapy and nights spent sobbing in Izuku's and Kirishima's once or twice, arms to mold himself into the person he wanted to be, it would kill him. He still hadn't forgiven himself for the person that he had been in middle school, even if Izuku long since had. He wasn't sure if their classmates would forgive him either. And as his rotten luck would have it, it was Izuku's turn next. The memory opened on his face, still scrawny and a bit afraid from his middle school days, and Kacchan's nails dug into his hand so hard he thought he might draw blood. The setting was different than he expected, though. Instead of the close walls of his classroom in Aldera, it was an airy open rooftop. Past Izuku was clutching a notebook to his chest and looking with wide and watery eyes at something behind them, and, as a group, they turned to look and see the skeletal form of the former #1 hero. "Didn't you say you had something to ask me?" And oh no. He couldn't stop the whisper from leaving his mouth, and he could feel Kacchan's questioning glance boring into the side of his face, but he couldn't do anything about it. He was frozen, vision going slightly gray at the edges and helpless to stop the progression of events about to happen. Can someone quirkless like me be a hero? Because of course it was this. Izuku didn't need to hear the rest of the speech, tuning out the extraneous bits to hear the only thing that really mattered. No. It wasn't his second time hearing this specific no, nor his third, or his fourth, or fifth. He heard it in his nightmares. Visions of that day turned into a bad ending. He heard it every time All Might looked at him with that little furrow in his brow during training when he wasn't mastering a move fast enough. He heard it, hours later that very same day, dancing in his head when All Might told him he could be a hero. With a quirk. He watched as his past self froze, fingers going stiff around the burned notebook in his hands, eyes dropping into that unseeing haze that he had used a lot of those days. Past Izuku didn't hear anything All Might said after that, eyes staring straight ahead as All Might left the rooftop, not giving another thought to the shattered dream he left behind. The memory didn't stop there, of course it didn't, and Izuku knew exactly why. Knew it right down to the tips of his numb fingers, clenching his own hand and Kachan's like a bear trap. The memory kept moving, showing the way that he let the notebook with All Might's signature flutter to the ground. It showed the way Izuku walked forward, jerky like a puppet on frayed strings, till he stood on the ledge. Showed the way that he looked over the edge just a bit too long. The memory cut off right before Izuku had heard the first explosion in the distance, calling him to Kachan's aid. The last vision his classmates saw of him was empty eyes staring down at the pavement stories below. All was silent in the blank room before it was broken by a sob. He turned his head slowly, meeting Ochako's wide, tear-filled eyes. "What the fuck?" Kachan whispered, hand shaking in Izuku's. "What the fuck?" The rest of the class didn't seem to be faring much better. They all seemed a mix of shocked, horrified, and devastated. Even the more stoic students looked away, faintly sick. Kirishima looked gutted, crying right along with Ochako. Sero stuttered, running a shaking hand through his hair. He said, "And he just left you, on a roof." It moved like a ripple through the group of them, settling in like a grim reality if they hadn't realized it yet. "How could he do that?" Momo's voice was choked up. "I don't know." They all snapped their heads to Aizawa-sensei, Izuku slower than the rest, but finding Aizawa-sensei looking straight at him, he looked... Angry was too light of a word. His teeth were bared into a snarl, fists clenched, and quirk flaring erratically, turning his eyes a deep red that mirrored his furious face. He looked enraged. "But I will definitely find out." All right, everyone, this concludes the one-shot entitled, I Wish I Could Believe You, You'd Never Wrong Me. I really like fics that address the fact that All Might really did crush his dreams there. Let me know your all thoughts and reactions to this fic, and as always, thank you so much for listening.